Okay, have you spoken to your lawyers?
I spoke to my lawyers and they said to me that they were going to get me extra meals because I can't eat the spicy food.
Okay.
The airport was full of noise, rolling suitcases, overhead announcements, families reuniting. On the surface, everything looked normal. Charlotte May Lee moved through Colombo's arrival terminal like any other traveler. Relaxed posture, calm expression, nothing to suggest panic. Just another passenger with a passport and a story. But what she didn't know was that officers were already waiting. A tip had come in. Her name was flagged. And the moment her suitcase touched the scanner, things changed. Inside her luggage, authorities found nearly 2 kilograms of high-grade cocaine, vacuum sealed, wrapped tight, and hidden beneath a custom false lining. Street value, over £200,000. Intended destination, Sydney, Australia. But she never got on that connecting flight. Charlotte claimed she was innocent. She said she thought the bag contained gold, that a man she met in Dubai had asked her to carry it, that she didn't know what was inside. But the evidence on her phone told a different story. Encrypted messages, suspicious transactions, and a carefully mapped travel route used by drug couriers across 3 continents. This wasn't a backpacker's mistake. It was part of a global trafficking network. And this is the story of how one British woman's journey turned into a 15-year sentence inside a Sri Lankan prison. Bandaranaike International Airport sits just north of Colombo, a hub for business travelers, tourists, and international stopovers. It's modern, efficient, and crucially, heavily surveilled. Sri Lanka had become a key checkpoint in the global drug pipeline, and authorities were no longer passive. Customs officers had been trained to look for small behavioral cues, nervous energy, inconsistent travel stories, oddly heavy luggage. Charlotte's arrival wasn't dramatic. There was no last-minute panic, no attempt to flee. She walked through the terminal just like hundreds of other passengers, calm, collected, blending in. But the tip-off had already landed. A joint task force had been monitoring certain flights from Dubai, and one passenger matched the risk profile exactly. Solo female traveler, new passport, short layover, long-haul destination. When her bag moved through the scanner, the customs agent didn't blink. He simply pressed a silent alert and waited. A second agent approached Charlotte politely and asked her to step aside for a routine bag check. She didn't resist. She even smiled. But when the officers unzipped her suitcase, they immediately spotted something wrong. The base was thicker than usual. The lining felt reinforced. A specialist team was called in. Within 10 minutes, they had peeled back the false compartment and exposed the cargo. Nearly 2 kilograms of compressed white powder, sealed in thick plastic, concealed inside the base and walls of the suitcase. Charlotte's smile dropped. The officers moved quickly. She was read her rights in English and escorted to a private room. The drugs were weighed, photographed, tested. The result was immediate. Cocaine, high purity, trafficking grade, enough to trigger the harshest sentencing guidelines under Sri Lankan law. She was calm, even as they took her phone. She didn't shout, she didn't cry. But when the officers opened her encrypted messaging app, they found conversations that shattered her innocence claim. Messages to and from foreign numbers, vague but coded. References to the parcel, the payment, the contact in Colombo. No one used the word cocaine, but the implication was clear. Charlotte was officially under arrest for drug importation. A crime that, under Sri Lankan law, carried a sentence of 15 years to life. She was taken to a local police holding cell, not yet the notorious prison she'd later call home, but stark and unwelcoming nonetheless. Concrete walls, no mattress, a toilet without a door, no phone call, no lawyer, just silence and the sound of footsteps outside. British consular staff were notified within 24 hours. They couldn't intervene. Not directly. All they could do was ensure she had legal representation and wasn't mistreated. But from the moment the drugs were found, the outcome was already leaning in one direction. And as word spread of the arrest, It became clear Charlotte May Lee wasn't just an unlucky tourist. She was now the centerpiece in an international smuggling case. And the story was only beginning to unfold. Within hours of Charlotte's arrest, Sri Lankan authorities had already begun pulling together the wider picture. In cases like these, the drugs were only half the story. The bigger value lay in what the phones could reveal: names, movements, payment trails, and links to larger operations. And Charlotte's phone, despite being locked, proved to be a gold mine. The first breakthrough came from her messaging app, one of several encrypted platforms popular among traffickers. The conversations were vague but patterned. Messages arrived from numbers with no names attached. Phrases like "ITA confirmed," "your window is 8 to 12," and "keep it sealed" were found in threads dating back weeks. Several were deleted, but not all. The timestamps aligned with her arrival in Dubai. One number, based in Colombia, had contacted her 3 times in the week before the flight. Payment records painted another picture. Charlotte wasn't wealthy. Her financial history showed modest earnings, mostly from seasonal jobs in the UK and short freelance work abroad. But 2 weeks before her trip, a payment of £4,800 had landed in her account. It came from an unregistered business account based in the UAE. The reference, consulting fee, investigators flagged it immediately. That amount, just under £5,000, was common in the courier world. Not enough to make someone rich, but enough to lure a first-timer. There was more. A hotel room in Colombo had been booked in her name, a mid-range property, nothing flashy, but she'd never actually checked in. CCTV from the airport showed her being met by a man in a grey hoodie who walked her out of the terminal. No name, no trace, just a grainy clip of a figure leading her to a white sedan. That man never resurfaced. Inside her suitcase, forensic technicians found tiny residue on the outer plastic wrap, a chemical used to mask the scent of narcotics from drug dogs. The same technique had been seen in previous seizures along the Dubai-Colombo-Sydney route. It wasn't amateur work. Someone had packaged this carefully. But the most damning clue wasn't chemical or digital, it was behavioral. Charlotte had told authorities she had no idea what she was carrying, that she'd been asked to transport gold. But her own travel itinerary contradicted the story. Her return flight to the UK was never booked. Her trip to Sydney, supposedly to meet the man again, was scheduled for less than 24 hours after arrival in Colombo. No sightseeing, no tours, just a tight, direct handover window. That level of precision, land, weight, move, fit the pattern of known drug mule logistics. And while there was still no smoking gun proving she understood the full extent of what was in her case, the circumstantial evidence was stacking up against her. British detectives, liaising with Sri Lankan authorities, began investigating whether Charlotte had been involved in any previous runs. Her passport showed several visits to the UAE and Southeast Asia over the previous 2 years. None had flagged her until now, but patterns were being analyzed, dates matched against known smuggling events. It wasn't just about this case anymore. Authorities were now asking, had she done this before? Back in the UK, her friends and family were stunned. Some insisted she was naive, too trusting, easily manipulated. Others were less certain. One former co-worker said Charlotte had been living above her means recently, traveling more, spending more, wearing new clothes. It wasn't definitive, but it added to the sense that something had shifted in her life well before she landed in Sri Lanka. Charlotte, meanwhile, maintained her story. She told her lawyer, a local defense solicitor appointed by the consulate, that she was innocent, that she had trusted someone who lied to her, that she was scared and confused. But the prosecution wasn't buying it. They had the suitcase, they had the cocaine, they had the messages, the money, the footage, and soon they'd have a confession from someone else. Someone Charlotte had no idea was about to flip. For weeks, Johnny remained a ghost, a name without a surname, a face without a file. Charlotte described him vaguely: early 40s, well-groomed, dark-skinned, possibly Middle Eastern or South American. He spoke perfect English, claimed to trade in gold and crypto, liked champagne, wore designer watches, always paid in cash. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Interpol was contacted. Agents began cross-referencing Charlotte's flight and hotel bookings with other mule arrests across the same corridor. One pattern stood out. In December 2019, another woman, also British, had been arrested in Kuala Lumpur with a similar concealment method. Her story? She met a man in Dubai. He offered her money to carry gold. She described him as charming, handsome, smooth-talking, said his name was John. That woman got 20 years. She never saw the man again. A match on facial recognition software came through 2 weeks into Charlotte's detention. CCTV from her hotel in Dubai, one of the few places where she and Johnny had been seen together, matched a known fraud suspect wanted in Spain. His real name? Julio Alvarez Martinez, a Colombian national. He had links to a Medellin-based trafficking cell that had expanded into the UAE over the past 5 years. Martinez was a middleman, a recruiter. He didn't handle product. He handled people, mostly women, Westerners, preferably with no criminal record. He offered them travel, glamour, money, and all they had to do was carry a sealed parcel from one country to another. He'd been active since at least 2017. Authorities had tried to trap him multiple times without success. He never stayed long in one country. He used burner phones. He booked hotels under fake names. His work was clean, compartmentalized. If a courier was caught, he vanished without trace. Charlotte's case was now being linked to a wider network under investigation by both the UNODC and Europol. At least 9 women had been caught in various countries with near identical stories: gold, travel, sealed bags. 2 had been sentenced. The others were still awaiting trial. But Charlotte's arrest offered something new, a clear set of digital breadcrumbs. Her phone contained voice messages from Martinez. The accent matched. His voice was smooth, measured, deliberate. "You'll be fine," one clip said. "Just hand it over in Sydney, no questions." Another message: "Don't open the bag. It's sealed for a reason." It was the strongest digital connection anyone had to him yet. Interpol began building a new profile. They traced his movements using flight bookings from Dubai International Airport. One alias, Marco Gutierrez, showed up days before Charlotte's flight. Same hotel, same floor, same checkout time. Martinez had left the country hours before Charlotte landed in Colombo. Clean exit, no evidence left behind. Despite the breakthrough, he remained untouchable. No known current address, no warrants that could stick internationally, but now his name was on official records. Charlotte's case had finally drawn blood. Authorities weren't just looking for a mule, they were hunting the recruiter. Meanwhile, Charlotte was moved from the police holding facility to the main remand prison in Colombo, a sprawling, overcrowded complex with minimal facilities. She was placed in a small cell with 3 other women, none of whom spoke English. There were no beds, just mats on the floor. Food was basic. Sanitation was worse. She still maintained she was tricked. But her case was shifting fast, and she was about to find out what it meant to face trial in a system where drug smugglers rarely walked free. Charlotte May Lee's case moved faster than most. Within 3 months of her arrest, she was facing formal charges in Sri Lanka's High Court. The speed had nothing to do with diplomacy or evidence. It was about the weight of the crime. In Sri Lanka, possession of a large quantity of cocaine is a Tier 1 offense. The law doesn't focus on intent, it focuses on presence. If the drugs are in your bag, they are yours. And once the amount passes a certain threshold, the presumption is guilt. The burden is on the defendant to prove otherwise. Her defense team knew this. They tried to stall. They filed motions to delay trial and requested further forensic testing on the suitcase lining. But nothing changed the core facts. 1.9 kilograms of cocaine, confirmed in 2 separate lab tests, were hidden in a false bottom. And that suitcase had her name tag on it. Charlotte didn't testify. Her lawyers advised against it. Instead, they submitted written statements. She claimed she had been manipulated, that she didn't pack the bag, that she had no knowledge of its contents, that she was carrying it on behalf of someone she met while traveling, someone who had since disappeared. The prosecution wasn't interested in hypotheticals. They presented the evidence simply. The drugs were expertly concealed. The packaging matched previous smuggling operations tied to South American cartels. Her travel plans were irregular. She had no return flight to the UK. Her phone showed communication with a man linked to international drug movement. They showed the messages. They played the voice notes. They brought in a customs expert to testify that no casual traveler would agree to carry sealed luggage for someone they barely knew, unless they knew or suspected what was inside. The judge didn't ask many questions. When the closing statements ended, there was no dramatic moment, no tears, no outbursts. Charlotte stood quietly as the verdict was delivered. Guilty, trafficking of a Class A substance across borders. Sentence, 15 years imprisonment to be served in full. She didn't react, not visibly. Just stood motionless as the guards escorted her back to the prison van. The courtroom emptied. The press outside, mostly local media, captured a few photos. A headline the next day read, "British woman gets 15 years for cocaine smuggling." No scandal, no outrage, just another drug bust, another name on the list. But for Charlotte, the real sentence was just beginning. She was transferred to Welakada prison, one of the most notorious facilities in South Asia. Overcrowded, under-equipped, hot, loud, chaotic. Built for 1,000 inmates, it housed over 3,000. Female prisoners were kept in a separate wing, but resources were limited. Water came twice a day. Medical help was minimal. Language barriers created isolation. Foreigners stood out. Inside, Charlotte was just another inmate, marked not by her crime, but by her nationality. She was nicknamed White Lady by some of the other prisoners. Some ignored her, some tried to talk, most kept to themselves. Time moved slowly, days blended together. Her lawyer visited once a month. The British Embassy checked in periodically, but could offer little more than encouragement. Sri Lanka doesn't have prisoner transfer agreements with the UK. And under local law, appeals are rarely successful once trafficking charges are proven. Charlotte was stuck. She began writing letters, and to her family, to NGOs, to journalists. She insisted she had been framed, that she was not a criminal, that she had trusted the wrong man. But while her words made it out, she didn't. Charlotte May Lee's story briefly caught fire in the UK press. The headlines were predictable. British woman jailed in Sri Lanka for drug smuggling. Holiday from hell, Gloucestershire backpacker gets 15 years. Was she set up? For a few weeks, her name circulated across tabloids and digital news platforms. Journalists scrambled for quotes from friends and neighbors. Some described her as quiet, kind, unlikely to be involved in anything illegal. Others admitted they hadn't heard from her in years. A few even suggested she might have known what she was doing. You don't carry a locked suitcase across borders without asking questions, one anonymous source said. But the media cycle moved on. Charlotte faded from the headlines, replaced by newer stories, louder scandals, fresher crimes. Behind the scenes, her family was fighting. They hired a private solicitor in the UK to explore diplomatic options. They reached out to MPs. Letters were sent to the Foreign Office, urging intervention, requesting a possible prisoner exchange. But the answers were always the same. The UK government cannot interfere with another country's legal process. One small victory came in the form of a prison transfer, not back to Britain, but to a less overcrowded women's facility in the central province. Conditions were still harsh, but slightly more manageable. She was given access to English language books. She taught basic phrases to some of the other inmates. Slowly, a rhythm formed, but freedom was nowhere in sight. Her appeal, filed 9 months after sentencing, was dismissed in under 30 minutes. The judge stated plainly, "There is no doubt about the presence of the narcotics, no doubt about the chain of custody, no compelling evidence of coercion or deception. Sentence upheld." By 2023, Charlotte had become one of over 60 British nationals imprisoned across Asia for drug-related crimes. Some were mules, some were recruiters, a few were truly innocent, most weren't.